the rise of direct-to-consumer labs will be a real inflection in the longevity space. And I think you've talked there brilliantly, Mo, about the sort of rise of this longevity sector. I think just in the last 3 months alone, I've seen 3 or 4 businesses in both the availability of lab work, so biochemistry and hematology and bloods. And then, of course, we've seen the big operators, Aura, Whoop, others start to integrate those labs into the wearable picture. So that is a big inflection in the last 3 months. And I think it's another example of technology, clinicians and operators moving at a speed that is far above and beyond the consumer's understanding. Lifestyle will still be the determining feature of not only our length of life, which will be determined as lifespan, but more importantly, our quality of life, which will be more determinable by this concept of health span.
Welcome to this week's episode of Lifts. I'm Matthew Januszek, and I'm very excited about our conversation and our guest today. I'm here with my co-host, Mohammed. Iqbal. Mo, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm still out on the eastern end of Long Island and spending a few more days here. And it's just really nice. DC is steaming hot right now. It's over 100 degrees. I'm not sure what that converts to in Celsius, but I think it's about 40. So out here, it's been great. I've been running along the beach, having a lot of lobster and seafood, and seeing friends. In fact, this week
I thought you could invite us over there, Mo. Like, I'm waiting for my invite, actually.
You're welcome anytime. In fact, I've got to stop by and see Kevin Yates because he's in Southampton right now. But I don't know if you saw my LinkedIn post this week, Matthew. But
it looks very grey.
It looked very grey, but it was great because it was raining Monday and Tuesday. But I stopped by Jack Daly's house, and he put me through a workout. I was with Douglas from High Rocks, and it was a lot of fun. We were on the beach throwing a 30-pound ball around, and had a really good time. So enjoying my time out here. How about you? I mean, have you come up with any new wellness hacks? I know we're going to be talking about it, but typically I feel like every 6 months you're trying something new, but we haven't talked about that in a while.
No, we haven't, and I'm not prepared. There are a few things that I've been working on, actually. They're kind of like partly figured out, and I'm hoping I'm going to use this conversation today with Oliver just to really sort of check if I'm going in the right direction. So maybe that's one for a future episode then, Mo. So I don't kind of embarrass myself in front of Mr. Oliver Patrick.
well, let's get right to it. I'm really excited to talk about our episode today. It's a topic that, Matthew, we've covered over the last 3 years quite a bit, and that is longevity. And it's interesting because that word longevity, I've heard that it's become overused a lot. People don't like using it, but I'm still using it, and we can let our guests speak to whether that term is correct or not. But I think it's a fascinating moment for us to have this conversation because whether you call it longevity or wellness, we've all seen it in the last 6 months. It's really moved from something that was in the fringes done by biohackers to something that is very much mainstream. In fact, I have a group of 8 dads in my neighborhood in Arlington, and they're talking about different peptides and should we take BCB157 or they're on GLP. So red light is something else which I'm hearing more and more about. Yeah. And a few years ago, this topic was mostly reserved for academic researchers. You talk about it at medical conferences, elite concierge-based health clinics, and maybe a relatively small group of high-intent biohackers. Today it's everywhere. We've had guests from gyms who are on talking about adding wellness services to their portfolio. Obviously, recovery spaces, boutique wellness clubs. I was at a Pilates studio in New York the other day, and they had a red light therapy and a sauna at a boutique fitness studio. That wasn't something that you saw even a year ago. It's coming into wearables. It is in supplements. I'll put another personal note there. I started taking creatine with HMB, and I've actually seen an improvement on my sleep and recovery scores. And of course, there's blood testing in this whole world here. So from an industry perspective, we mostly talk about the fitness industry, not enough about wellness, but it's really created this immense opportunity that a lot of operators are really trying to capitalize on and figure out, okay, how do we, number one, help serve our members better, that, moving from just tracking how often they come to the gym into being more outcome focused. And number two, is there an opportunity for them to participate in a larger share of wallet? And we've had some great conversations there. the market is responding well, and there's a lot of innovation that's happening. But here's the paradox that we keep on seeing, and I know we've talked about this with Ali before. We have more health information than ever before. There's more experts, there's more podcasts, there's more ways to measure yourselves. But more broadly speaking, the population as a whole, they're still moving in the wrong direction. So even though we have more data and more supplements, as a whole, we're not moving in the right direction. So while we have the wellness economy that's booming, the longevity area is exploding, we have more technology and more wearables, but I wouldn't say that the average person is necessarily becoming healthier. And I think that's the tension which we want to unpack a bit today. So to cover all this, we've got, I think, the perfect guest, someone who we've had on the podcast before, Ollie Patrick, hailing from the UK. I don't know specifically where in the UK you're in, but I know in the UK, I think you're in London, but we'll let you cover that in your intro. In your career, you've sat at the intersection of physiology, nutrition, high performance, preventative health, and behavioral change. You have co-founded one of the world's most advanced health evaluation and personalized health management services. You also co-founded Future Practice, where you have served as clinical director at Pillar Wellbeing. You have consulted for some of the best brands in the industry. And I've heard you, Ollie, speak a ton at conferences. You've got a podcast, and you're definitely someone who I follow and I'm always keen to listen to. And you've always bring so much valuable insight. So I want to first start with a question. In the last 3 months, is there something that you've either personally experienced or you've personally seen that you think is going to be impactful in this wellness economy that we're in?
It's such a great intro, and you've started with an absolute belter of a question. Last 3 months, I think the rise of direct-to-consumer labs will be a real inflection in the longevity space. And I think you've talked there brilliantly, Mo, about the sort of rise of this longevity sector. I think just in the last 3 months alone, I've seen 3 or 4 businesses in both the availability of lab work, so biochemistry and hematology and bloods. And then, of course, we've seen the big operators, Aura, Whoop, others start to integrate those labs into the wearable picture. So that is a big inflection in the last 3 months. And I think it's another example of technology, clinicians and operators moving at a speed that is far above and beyond the consumer's understanding. And if you're putting me on the spot with that one, I'd say that's probably it. I haven't seen anything that says salvation lies ahead. I've seen probably a greater fragmentation of longevity as people have seen this sort of global demand rise. And I'm not sure it's a consumer-led demand either. I'm not sure much of the longevity demand is coming from people. I think it's coming from a better understanding of the science and a better opportunity, as you say, to commercialize offerings. But I think the race for longevity is an interesting space. Is it owned by medicine? Is it owned by aesthetics? Is it owned by biohacking technologies? Is it owned by fitness and nutrition? And when we talk about longevity, that critical piece, what do we mean by it, and how would we ever determine it if it's only measurable at the point of my death?
One of the reasons, Oliver, we exchanged some conversations or some messages on LinkedIn. And I just to give everyone a little bit of background, the reason this conversation kicked off was that Mo and I were talking about this report that came up, and the report really was related to a previous episode that we did with you, Oliver, where I guess one of the biggest takeaways from that previous conversation was that while genetics matter, we're not prisoners of them. And for decades, this accepted thinking, which I understand was based on this Danish twin studies from the 1990s, was that genetics account for around about 20 to 25% of how long we live, with lifestyle environment accounted for the remaining sort of 75 to 80%. So that seemed to be putting the control back into our hands of, all right, well, look, no matter what we're born with, we can really have a big impact on it. But what seems to have happened recently is that that this recent update, which seemed to sort of slightly change the way that was being explained, seemed as though that genetics were a lot more responsible, and one of the researchers involved warned that people might become fatalistic, thinking that if genes matter, then why bother? So I wanted to speak to you because we had a little bit of backwards and forwards, and I thought, because it's such an important study with such quite large implications, even with me, I'm almost like, well, sod it, just enjoy life and not worry about too much. Can you give us a little bit of an overview, and maybe sort of start again from probably, give us a little bit of an overview of this study, the recent update, and then where your position is after reviewing, reviewing some of the recent press releases that have, been in the media quite a lot recently.
I think it's a brilliant pickup, Matthew, because it's an important thing. Like, my position, I'll start at the end, is that lifestyle will still be the determining feature of not only our length of life, which will be determined as lifespan, but more importantly, our quality of life, which will be more determinable by this concept of health span. So the statistics have changed for sure. That figure that you mentioned was this sort of general idea: if I develop a disease, particularly a lifestyle disease, if we think of the traditional big four, where you've got neurocognitive decline like Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, and cancer. And each of those would be a term that includes multiple sort of subdivisions. The general theme is, when people first decoded the genetic material, there wasn't a gene for a heart attack. There wasn't a gene for cancer. There wasn't a gene for Alzheimer's. There were genes that increase your predisposition, but they didn't cause. And actually then using identical twins who have the same genetic material, it's always a really fascinating trivia question. So if you've got identical twins, genetically they are the same. So when the health outcomes of genetic twins was sort of mapped over time, we saw quite large variance in both the incidence of lifestyle disease and then actually their mortality, how long they lived. And this narrative was building, say, actually, your heritability, so what I got from my mother and father genetically, isn't going to determine whether I get these big diseases. It's down to my lifestyle. And then we had this fascinating moment where that was getting down to sort of 5%, 10%. So we're really saying, actually, genes contribute very little. And then someone said, oh, isn't there sort of a statistical anomaly here that we haven't discounted other causes of death? Like, we've got this big variance between identical twins, but one of them died in a car accident and one of them died because they contracted a viral disease on holiday. So they hadn't really absorbed into the statistical modeling death not caused by lifestyle disease. And so they then re-looked at all the data and said, do you know what, when we sit down and look at this, the contribution of our DNA, our genetics to health looks closer to 50%. So instead of it being a diminishing contribution, it suddenly swelled back up to a sort of a coin toss, saying actually the contribution of these diseases seems to have a greater heritability than we thought 5 years ago, 2 years ago. What does that mean? It means, I think there'll be some people who go, right, sod it then. I'll just, go and get boozed up and miss the gym and I won't bother going to sleep properly. But broadly, that isn't the way we should look at the data. The data actually doesn't say 50% of your disease is caused by your genes. It says we can explain 50% of the difference in mortality through genes. And that subtle difference comes back to the central premise. The biggest thing that will affect your length of life and quality of life will still be the actions you take across your lifespan. The actions you take, not in one domain of lifestyle movement, not in one domain like nutrition, but in a holistic lens of all the ways in which your environment interfaces with your genes. And we sit in this really important intersection now where we say, yes, genes matter, but the turning on and off of genes, the process which we call epigenetics, which is driven by lifestyle and behavior mostly, will still be the biggest thing that influences health and is critically the only thing that we can currently control. And I say the only thing we can control because we've got an incredible gene editing experiment going on a young boy in Mexico at the moment who's got a muscle wasting disorder, and they're trying to use the CRISPR methodology to insert a virus that edits the gene that is faulty for him to develop that disease. So we are sitting on the landscape of being able to alter our genetic material in human trials, and that is costing 2.8 million for that single boy to receive that treatment. So we need to watch that really closely and see how that pans out. It's a Duchenne's disease, I believe, which is a sort of progressively difficult muscle wasting disorder. And so two things. Can we change our DNA? Well, peptides, gene editing, that's all starting to influence that element. In the real time, what we must be clear on is people should be galvanized into controlling lifestyle, should be, again, given clear guidance that this is the key to living long and living well. And I separate those two things, but they're intertwined, but they are separate. And therefore, we've got to be careful that this gene study doesn't cast shade onto the lifestyle industry and put people into passive healthcare solutions, which would be a big misstep, I think. So I sit in the same position, Matthew, that our lifestyle is our biggest key to unlock, health, well-being, performance, longevity. There's nuance to that, of course. We can't at the moment influence our genes, so we should focus on what we can control rather than get too caught up in what we can't.
So I think that's incredibly interesting because I agree. I hear this a lot, and it is challenging because it's also a very complicated question. And just as humans, we want to have a simple answer to it. So it seems, I think, that we are trying to oversimplify something to say that genetics either matter and they carry an over-indexed amount of weight towards your longevity and your health, or that it does not matter and lifestyle actually plays a bigger role. I think the reality here, though, is that genetics do matter and influence your lifestyle decisions, such that, Ali, there are things that you might do versus what I would do to impact our overall health and to extend our health span, right, based off our genetics. And that's the part that I think needs to be unpacked a little bit further. We're starting to see that. In fact, I recently visited our good friend Jeff Zwiefel, who just became president of 10X Health, and understood how they go through their own gene process to identify what genes you have and how environmental factors could help impact your longevity outcomes. But I have a couple of questions for you. I think the first one is, there are so many therapies and supplements and lifestyle changes that you can do. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed and, ironically, to get overstressed and increase your cortisol because you're so worried about the data that you're collecting, the supplements that you have to take, and all the things that you potentially can do. But at the end of the day, I believe, and from the research that I've read, the highest impactful items still come down to the fundamentals, such as starting with sleep. Could you improve your sleep quality without any? And the answer is yes. Can you get better sleep? Are you engaging in movement? Is your nutrition sound of avoiding ultra processed foods, avoiding sugars, and are you hydrating enough? I mean, to me, those still are the main pillars. And of course, you can go deeper in any one of those pillars, but would love to get your thought. Is that still how you view the world, that you've got to get these fundamentals right? Are those pillars the right ones? Would you add or remove anything?
This week's episode of the Lifts podcast is brought to you by eGym. eGym is building the future of smart fitness. Their connected ecosystem combines intelligent equipment, AI-powered software, and the WellPass corporate wellness platform to help operators grow their business and deliver measurable health outcomes to exercisers of all shapes and sizes. From powering gym floors to supporting employee wellness, eGym is redefining the workout one rep at a time. Learn more at egym.com.
I love that, Mo. And I think, when I was involved in setting up the world's most advanced health assessment clinic, which was my old business, so I don't do that anymore, you would spend an awful lot of money to identify the absence of one of those behaviors. And then your strategic recommendation would be one of those behaviors. So someone might come in and pay £30,000 and be told, well, you need to do 8,000 steps, or you need to go to bed at a consistent sleep time, or you need to, reduce the percentage of your diet that's ultra processed food and increase the percentage that's nourishment, and what you got for the money was the absolute personalized dosage of that behavior. But the behavior itself was still the same behavior as you might read on a government website. The pillars are, for me, absolutely where everything must start and most things should end. The idea of biohacks giving a marginal gain when someone has overlooked a foundational behavior is really something that in most of the businesses I'm involved in, I'm trying to sex up the basics, try and bring a hyper personalized rationale to which behavior will be the biggest one to focus on, because there's lots of foundational behaviors, and targeting the one you're already okay at won't be as effective as targeting the one you're really poor at. But movement is the bedrock of all of this, which is why I firmly believe the movement profession has the best opportunity to be a holistic wellness professional, because I think movement is the most complicated of the basic lifestyle requirements. Sets and reps for resistance training, and zone 2 versus zone 5, and mobility, plyometrics, quality stretching, daily activity. That's more confusing than eating food that looks like something that came out of the earth, going to bed and waking up with the light and the dark. The foundations in sleep, the foundations in nutrition, I think, are a much simpler beast. They require as much behavioural support, and the behavioural economics of convincing people to do them are there. But I would again say, if someone said, Ollie, which health assessment should I do? I'd say, well, do you meet government guidelines for movement? 150 minutes cardio, 2 weight training, 2 mobility sessions. Do you eat 5 portions of fruit and veg, 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, 30 grams of fiber a day, 30 different plants a week? Do you get 7 to 9 hours with consistent sleep and wake times, free from caffeine, free from alcohol? I would add to those basics social connection. Do you engage in tribal activities? Are you part of a group? Is there a dependency on you, or are you dependent on some kind of ecosystem? And I'd add to that sort of some of the cognitive behaviors around self-compassion, grit, resilience. So what I would call psychological fitness. If those foundations aren't met, what do you expect to find in the test? If you don't move, what do you expect me to find in your lipid profile or your inflammatory markers? If you don't nourish, what do you expect me to find in your gut microbiome? If you don't sleep, what do you expect me to find on your cognitive test? If you do not socially connect, what do you expect me to find in all your key sort of biological markers of success? And I think somehow people got distracted that biology sits separate to behavior. Biology is an extension of behavior. If my biology and physiology is just adapting to the behaviors it's meeting on a consistent, regular basis, if those foundational behaviors are not there, I will sooner or later measure dysfunction, and genes will play a role in how much dysfunction I measure. So someone might get away with something and another might not at all. And here's that idea again. Genes don't, of course, in most cases cause disease. If we think of the gene for producing melanin, 3 different levels of tanning capability on this call, and I see it very much at the lower end of that spectrum. So do my genes give me a risk of cancer? No, they mean I need to adhere to sun protection more virulently than you both do. That's the behavior. So
just a quick part on sun protection. You might have seen this, but recently there's been a movement towards no sunscreen.
Agreed. Yeah.
Which seems scary. I'd love for you to comment on that.
Yeah. So, and again, it's that great idea again that because of the critical role of vitamin D, which is fundamentally a hormone with, over 100 biological benefits, we're seeing such a mass vitamin D deficiency. We're seeing massive circadian biology, our 24-hour clock dysregulation, that we've made the sun the enemy, and the sun isn't the enemy. Excessive UVA, UVB rays are. And I think what we're really looking at is we don't want to avoid the sun. We want to avoid the midday sun, that middle spectrum light, which is the one that's got the highest propensity for skin damage. But we need that morning light. We need that evening light. I always, if you follow my Instagram, most of my photos are taken in the last hour of the day, because the golden hour, you get this on the West Coast in particular. Matthew will be, lots of photos of him looking magnificent as the sun goes down, because all of that red light that brings in that beautiful sort of aesthetic is a critical part of regulating our sleep cycle. So I think, again, it's when we try and simplify things to, is sun cream good or bad for you? It's probably not ideal first thing in the morning. It's probably not needed in the evening, but it's definitely needed in the midday sun. And then what sun cream is it? Is it full of forever chemicals and toxins, or is it relatively clean? So there's nuance upon nuance, Mo, but I think the general theme on all these things are, I spend my life using technology to reinvigorate the basics and find both a hyper-personalized dose of the basic, and then critically use that data to reward the behavior that gives the individual that self-efficacy. That I started dropping caffeine, that solved my low immune system, that revealed itself through a change in my heart rate variability. And that relationship between me getting a goal through adhering to a behavior and having that evidenced in the metrics, I think is the bit that we can use modern science to galvanize the old foundational habits.
You mentioned making the basics sexy, and I do agree. There's a lot to be said around that, because it's like, the basics have been around for a long time. We've known about fitness for a long time, so that's kind of a little bit boring. And we've known about sleep again for quite a while, and That's boring. Okay, Oliver, tell me the new sexy thing that I need to be telling, to be using. Tell me about that new pill that I need to be trying, or those new injectables. And I think, as Mo mentioned at the opening of the conversation, this word longevity is being pasted around everything. And as an industry, we kind of like to latch onto these words and pump them into everything that we can. One of the other words that kind of I get to see attached a lot to it, certainly gets a lot of clicks and buzzing, sort of buzz is the biohacking word as well. And going through a lot of events and seeing a lot of products that are coming out, from the hardware to nutrition and supplements, are really tapping into this. And the consumer is clearly influenced by a lot of the big social media people out there that are doing particularly well at the moment. So I wanted to get your view about this, because a lot of people that are listening to this are in the fitness business. They're operators, investors in the space. And if you walk into many gyms today, you'll see, certainly it'll be difficult to get away from seeing some sort of promotion for things like red light, saunas, cold plunges, compression, IV therapy, and particularly in the US now, that everywhere and everybody and almost like every teenager's talking about peptides. So what I wanted to get your thoughts on, really, as an advisor to some of the professionals in the industry, is if you were sitting down with operators with a relatively limited budget, what would you be advising them to invest in first, particularly if they are a business that are selling fitness? And going back to your first answer, or to the answer you just given, there is a lot that we could be doing around fundamentals. So should we be worrying and investing in getting some red light therapy and hyperbaric chambers and that kind of stuff? Or should we be just doubling down on the basics, or a combination of two? Like, what is your position on this, and what should we be thinking in some kind of like ranking order?
Great question. I'm a bit Walter White on this. If you're fans of Breaking Bad, and I say to operators and I say, tread carefully, because there's a very quick opportunity to discredit your high integrity on your core offering by choosing the wrong intervention for the wrong reason. I think longevity itself is an interesting space. Someone has decided that's a consumer demand. I don't know many people who are engaging in challenging habits and behaviors, so they may not get a disease in 30 years' time that they don't really understand what that disease is. So we've got to just be clear. If you're positioning longevity, the longevity marketplace has got gyms which are talking about retention of biological capability, so retaining cardiorespiratory fitness, retaining muscle mass and strength, retaining bone mass, and really it's a very clear outcome metric for good quality exercise and training. The medical communities realized it can sell longevity as a preventative word. So rather than just selling services to people with existing chronic disease, it can sell longevity and repurpose the MRI scan that was, measuring the size of tumors, and now it can measure whether there is a tumor. It's the CT scan that did do, CT angiograms, and now it's doing a full chest CT. And so longevity is also preventative medicine's new vehicle. We've also seen anti-aging disappear and rebrand as longevity. So hotel, spa, and luxury have moved into longevity with the idea of sort of visual, aesthetic longevity. And it doesn't matter how long you live as long as you're beautiful when you die, which is totally valid. You go for that. And then you've got the cellular longevity crew, which would be, well, I've got less NAD in my cells at 20 than I had at birth, and less at 40 than 20. So I'll infuse this molecule that works in my mitochondria to help with the production of energy. And I will hack my cells with more oxygen through hyperbaric oxygen therapy, or through using red light modalities like photobiomodulation. And again, I think that the first piece again is, lots of companies ask me what they should do. And I say, have you asked your people what they want? And have you asked them whether they trust you to extend that relationship further? And I think those two bits are really important, that you, depending on what relationship you have with them, and have you built a brand based on high efficacy exercise, high efficacy nutrition? Have you nailed the basics so that you have the right to play in a heightened space? Because if you don't train people well, please don't put a hyperbaric in the corner of your room and think that that's going to be a particularly effective, broader strategy. So I think the foundations play a part in that what's next piece, because there's a lot of, again, the idea that I would put someone into red light therapy who didn't sleep 7 hours a night is mathematically so illogical, it's hard to conceive. So why would I put biohacking wellness technologies into a site that doesn't do sleep coaching? Why would I, put a high-end diagnostic clinic when I don't give nutritional coaching? What do I expect to find in the bloods if I'm not telling people to hit their nutritional benchmark? So I think the big opportunity of the fitness sector in particular is we are a place that intervenes on behavior. Our strength is the other's weakness. They don't have a place. They can create a strategy through data aggregation and intelligent, AI algorithms to tell me that's the one thing I need. But then they're trusting that I will get that thing and I'll do that thing. We are the doer. We are the place. We are the coach. We are the counselor. We are the community. And I think, in longevity, there'll be a lot of people fighting to be the strategist. My firm belief is to be the place where you execute the foundations beautifully, more broadly perhaps than they're already doing.
Well, no, I think that's a good spot, Ollie, because I talk about this a lot, where when you think about who's best suited to help the modern day consumer today, when all of our healthcare systems, by the way, as I'm traveling the world, they're all broken. Yeah. They all could be better. And, the US might have some of the best facilities in the world, but it's largely inaccessible. Yeah. In a country like the UK, you've got a very accessible system in the world, but you're dealing with long wait times and other issues and other limitations. But when you think about the fitness role, so you may go see your doctor either because you need them to intervene on something that is wrong, and at that point it's too late when you have that intervention, or it's for your annual physical. Yep. But to your point, the fitness doors, they're visiting the facility anywhere from 2 to 4 to sometimes 6 times or 7 times a week. They're engaging in the activity that is going to have a higher index in terms of impact to their longevity. And I think that is why gyms and fitness centers, to your point, are looking to add these services. The conversation that we've had on this podcast with many of our guests is you've seen the rise of wellness-specific centers, whether it is serotonin or IV drip clinics, or whoever the counterpart is in the UK and around the world. Yeah. In some cases, alongside gyms, but in most cases, independently. Yeah. And now they're trying to come into gyms. Gyms have started implementing what I'm calling like recovery type of equipment, such as contrast therapy, the stuff that they know, percussion therapy, maybe massage beds, those types of things. But they really haven't gone all in on the IV drips, peptides. So I'm just curious if I'm an operator, and I mean, I would love to get your perspective on both HVLP, mid-market, and premium, because they have different consumers. Yeah. Do you think they all should be going in deeper into more therapeutic areas? Granted, if they've got the foundational coaching and things like that in place, and what would those be?
Yeah, I think it's the $1 million question, because, and again, I'd say the first thing is train your people. And I say that again, it's like, if your staff can't explain the benefit of the wellbeing technology, it will be very much something that goes on in the room down the corridor. And when I say train your staff, I don't mean one person as an expert. I mean your front of house. I mean your duty manager, your head of PT. If there's not a language of wellness, then that's a mistake. And this is not fitness's first foray into these spaces. We put GPs in gyms before. We've put some testing and medical partnerships. Until it's embedded into the culture of the organization, I don't think it can work. So that's point number one. In sort of priority order, recovery is obviously the natural first ally. And I think recovery is also misunderstood and miscommunicated, because most people think recovery is the preserve of the elite level athlete who's doing the 6 sessions a week and needs to, get over their post-exercise inflammatory process as quickly as possible to return to sport. And most people aren't hitting, if they're hitting 1.2 sessions a week, you don't need strategic recovery from that. And in fact, the more we look at recovery modalities like cold, the more we see they're blunting the effect of the strength training. So the horror of me turning up for my one strength training that I managed to clear my diary and put my kids into care for, and I get there and then I jump in the cold bath and I get no gains from it whatsoever. And you can both see from my camera angle, I need all the gains I can get. So the idea that time would be lost is such a horrible opportunity cost lost. But it comes again, what do we mean by recovery? And I think I encourage brands to define what they mean by recovery. And for me, recovery is the biological return of energy, not the return of capability to play. And so who needs recovery? The busy perimenopausal, professional woman who's got absolutely no headspace, who's got no ability to regulate her autonomic nervous system. And we're seeing the autonomic nervous system as the big sort of wellness vehicle through everything from vagus nerve stimulation to haptic beds to meditation to whatever it might be, and even hyperbarics and PEMF mats. I think the first logical play is, let's assume, again, your model again, that I've got a clear language of what I mean by well-being and whether I'm talking about longevity and what I mean by longevity. That's consistent through my staff. They coach on movement, nutrition, and sleep, rest and recovery. Then having recovery technologies as an adjunct to a movement space is, of course, very logical. And I think in that space, we will not trump sauna and traditional, dry sauna, finished sauna, whatever you might call it. The data on that is so strong. And, we still can't entirely separate its benefit from, is it just mimicking low intensity exercise or is it separate modalities? But I can't.
And in sauna, real quick, you've clearly called out the dry sauna versus the infrared.
Yeah, and I prefer infrared, but the data isn't supported. So I think, almost coming back to that first question, I think light will be the next frontier of wellness. We're seeing now red light has had a huge permeation into the sector. It has again, dose-dependent and technology-dependent role on potential collagen, which makes it a really strong vehicle for the spa and luxury hospitality industry, where the red light face mask has become almost a mandated part of your premium 5-star retreat or holiday bait. And if you go to a premium 5-star hotel with any wellness lilt whatsoever in the next 18 months, I would imagine there's a red light mask that will be available to you or in your room already. So red light as a collagen stimulation device, yes, but red light seems to have a really powerful opportunity to create more cellular energy and reduce inflammation. So photobiomodulation has legs, really does have legs. And so I think if I'm looking to restore energy on that broader definition of recovery, then red light would be a really key part of that, as would near infrared. And near infrared, near because it's closer to the visible light spectrum, is the one that doesn't make you sweat but has an anti-inflammatory impact. So permeates a little deeper into the tissues and elicits that anti-inflammatory. And I think the thing that we'll start to realize, and longevity, interesting, where we look at the hallmarks of aging, which are the 12 biological reasons that I cellularly age. Inflammation got added to that in I think 2022 as one of the adapted hallmarks of aging, as was what's called dysbiosis, which is the imbalanced gut microbiome. And those two were really interesting because they create two new therapeutic targets for longevity. Anything that decreases inflammation, therefore, could become a logical longevity vehicle, as could anything that increases the diversity and quality of my gut microbiome. So 10 years ago, if I said, here's a red light and a kombucha, you'd be like, that's a wellness hack. If I give those to you now, I could justify they're reducing inflammation. They're part of an anti-aging strategy, and therefore I can sell them as a more premiumized product. I think I prefer infrared sauna because it's not heat, it's heat plus light. So I get the detoxification benefit of the sweating, but I get the anti-inflammatory effect of the light. And if I can add red light to that, so I've got full spectrum, red light, near infrared, far infrared, and heat, then I think you've got a multifaceted box of potential longevity and wellness benefits that you could sell in many different ways.
One quick question there, temperature.
Yeah.
On just one quick question, Matthew, but temperature on the sauna. So I've heard this go both ways. Dry finished saunas can go over 200 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Red light cannot reach that. Is there an ideal temperature that people should be looking at?
When it comes to dry sauna, most of the data seems to be, and I am horribly in Celsius, so Mo, you're going to have to convert for me into the American audience, but it's somewhere at sort of 85 to 90 seems to be where you raise core temperature sufficiently. And of course, both methodologies are trying to raise my core temperature to elicit a multitude of benefits. The main one being the release of these heat shock proteins, which are sort of restorative biological process that maintains cellular structure. And what we see in aging is we see a deterioration of the 3D structure of the cell, and heat shock proteins have a role in preserving that. So they heat my core temperature in different ways. The ambient temperature in an infrared doesn't really matter. It's almost a placebo effect because I'm sweating because the light is vibrating the water molecules within my tissue. So the ambient temperature accelerates my sweating, and that will be at 55 to 65 degrees historically. but it's not the temperature that brings the benefit, it's the light. So then you're into, and here's the new frontier, does the panels, do they create the irradiance that is appropriate to elicit the benefit? Because if I'm judging it on, if I'm in an infrared box, I can't tell if it's working or not, because I don't know if it's getting to the right tissue layer. If I get into a boiling hot room, I know it's working because the room's boiling hot. So I think the efficacy of infrared is quite an interesting new frontier. We're seeing cheaper panels coming out and quick to market propositions that don't produce the light at the right frequency to elicit the right benefit. So that's wasted time. So the question one is, if I do infrared, can I do it from a robust third-party check panels manufacturer? If it's Finnish, again, it's dose dependency. We had a great example with Brian Johnson recently, who decided to check his core temperature with a rectal thermometer. And actually, I think he ingested a thermometer. And he realized even though he was doing like 90 degrees for 25 minutes, his core temperature wasn't rising sufficiently. So it wasn't getting up towards 39, 40 degrees core temperature to elicit the heat shock proteins according to science. And he then went online and said, well, therefore it's been useless. And that's such a reductionist approach. Of course, it's not been useless. He's detoxified. He's had an exercise mimetic, which has reduced his physiological stress. All of those saunas will have contributed to better sleep onset, possibly better sleep architecture. He probably sat in that sauna and bonded or spoke with one of his minions or the people that sort of follow him around. The whole thing is we can't reduce any of these processes to a single mechanism because they're multifactorial. And I think in the same way as we talk about exercise, I can justify VO2 max building versus strength training. Ultimately, the body's adapting to the habit it can sustain. And if you can't tolerate high heat, then stop trying to do it, get into the infrared. If you are heat adapted and you love that high temperature, then the science at the moment would say dry would be the modality of choice. My point would be, if I was opening an anti-aging longevity clinic, I would go at light. If I was building a social wellness infrastructure based around people tolerating high heat in a contrast environment, I'd probably consider going Finnish or dry. So it's being very clear. In the same with all these things, someone says, Ollie, is Whoop good for me or is hyperbaric? I'm like, what was the question you were asking it? Right? Is this a quicker way for me to get over my DOMs? Is this a way of clearing my future risk of Alzheimer's? Is this a way of me tracking when I can have my last caffeinated drink? The wellness industry has decided to start with the answer before it really clarified the question. And I think much of the work I'm doing is just getting people to really be clear on what question they believe their consumers are asking and what scope of practice they want to adopt in answering that question more in a more fulfilled way.
We've covered a lot there, so I just want to back up slightly, Oliver, just to help me understand this. And certainly, I think you make a really good point. It's like, what's the question we're trying to answer? What's the answer we're looking for? What's the question we're trying to ask in some respect? And a lot of what I see is that we're getting hit by things and we're responding by saying, okay, let's do this, instead of really thinking through what we're trying to do. Now, yeah. I know this is going to be, again, a really broad question, and please challenge me if it is, because hopefully, we'll all sort of learn as a benefit. But based on a lot of the science that's there, and you even mentioned about red light, and this is something that we're going to do an episode on red light. But from what I understand, there's a huge amount of variation in terms of how effective it is in terms of the tubes where it's made. Yep. Even the perspex that goes on in front of them can have a different effect on how the light is absorbed into the body. So that in itself is really questionable, and you can't just put a red light in and tick that box. Agreed. But if you were to look at I guess outside of the fundamentals, which is the fitness side, when you start layering on these things, which would naturally either help you recover or complement the exercise in what I think the industry is calling recovery. So, all right, I've worked out. Now, what do I do? Yes, I've got to sleep, but looking at some of these therapies, which are the popular ones, are red light, sauna, cold plunge. What would you say if we are looking for something that would apply to everybody? And I'm not talking about elite athletes, because they would have their own specifics, but the general person on the street, myself, you, Ollie, Mo, what would be areas that I could then investigate in and are worth putting some time into understanding it, that we should really complement exercise with? Is it just pretty boring to say, yeah, look, everyone's been doing sauna for a long time. As long as you've got a good sauna and it's the right temperature, just start there. That's about it. Or are there any other ones? And just put them in, 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I think sauna is number one in terms of outside of the traditional ecosystem. I think the data supports that. And, I'm in love with sauna, but I'm in love with the data. I'm in love with the anecdata. I'm in love with the whole thing. So I think sauna is almost now, it would be odd to have a fitness and wellness facility that doesn't have it in there. And you're making the assumption the individual might have one at home, or they're going to go to a third party and spend money there. And I think that's a pretty solid return on investment is the sauna. Secondly, I think that the thing that most people need is a space for true restitution, for physiological recovery, which would be autonomic nervous system regulation. We're seeing a lot of, in the UK, haptic beds, so beds that vibrate and might do that with binaural beats, so beats that are trying to change the brain frequency and move me out of a very sort of high beta, scanning the world for the next problem modality into alpha brain waves, where I'm sort of chilled, or even into theta brainwaves where I'm sort of meditation, or even delta brainwaves where I'm asleep. So trying to downregulate my brain, downregulate my physiology, and in sort of physiological terms, move me into a state of parasympathetic tone. And we've seen the rise of vagus nerve innervation devices like Neurosim, Yojo, Pulsetto, devices that basically electrocute me calm. And I think that the biggest challenge most people have now is what is being phrased as allostatic load, which is just the bombardment of sensory overwhelm. From all of the light, the noise, but then the social media connectivity, 24-hour news cycles, all of the information that triggers my autonomic nervous system to be slightly vigilant, slightly ready for threat, at the cost of ever being truly disengaged. And what the spa industry always did well was create a space where I could disconnect. It would be analog, it would be sensory, it would be rotating around touch. And what I've seen is spa move from a sort of luxury weekend with the girls to something I might try and do at lunchtime to try and enable me to retain cognitive clarity deep into the day. And so what we've seen is two worlds converging. Spas tried to have movement studios and try to compete on the wellness stage. And Emlyn Brown, who's the head of wellness at Mandarin Oriental, previously at Accor, has very rightly said that they're trying to be the world's biggest fitness operator. These hotel gyms repurposing, because they've got a recovery studio, they've got massage, they've probably got an F&B outlet. So I think we're really interested that what the spa have stolen is the movement space, trying to become a membership club. But gyms have also stolen a bit of the spa world and said, why don't you come here to shelter from the storm? And so that could be for someone breathwork classes, it could be for another haptic beds, it could be red light photo, biomodulation. It could also be hyperbaric. I think the technology in that space has got two purposes. One is it will have a mechanistic value, which is reducing inflammation or making more energy in my cells. But most importantly, when I'm doing that, I'm not doing something else. It's an analog process. It's groups might say that our choice for that is we're going to go and do yoga outside, or we're going to do something in the wilds and try and leverage the biophilia, the human downregulatory benefit of being in nature. I think point number 2 would be something that stops the world and gives me space to move into a state of true physiological recovery, and you could put whatever you wanted into there. Third would probably be hyperbaric, and I think it's coming into the space for good reason, because it targets two mechanisms that are challenging. Inflammation, which is this root cause, difficult to say that. It sits alongside most modern day malaise, most modern day disease progressions, and reducing oxidative stress, which is sort of the cellular process through which we both create inflammation, but also visibly and cellularly age. And I think it's also meets that consumer expectation. It feels clever. And the consumer's experience, this does matter enormously. If they see a meaty bit of hardware, if you're wearing an oxygen mask, it's very postable, it's very shareable, it's very dinner party braggable. It's like, where have you been? Well, I was at my hyperbaric chamber. And it's, suddenly you're the one at the dinner party and everyone's listening in. I think it's got real clinical validity. I think it's got quite high experience value. And if someone does a hyperbaric session, I'd expect to see physiological recovery. I'd expect to see, again, reduced inflammation, reduced oxidative stress. And critically, one of the big frontiers of future longevity would be cognitive longevity, which is how do I retain this brain health? And we'll see hyperbarics as a really powerful mediator of neurological health. And so I think those would be my three: sauna and whichever modality you suit, but I prefer infrared, some form of true down regulating product or service, and then hyperbarics. That would be my three. And I don't touch IVs. And I say that I don't feel the data on IVs is robust. I think NAD as IV has been broadly shown in many cases to not be an effective way of getting NAD into the cells. It's not something that sits extracellularly. So therefore, the use of precursors, be that vitamin B3, NR, or NMN, seem to have more validity with lower impact. People love the idea of an IV, but I used IVs in clinical practice for people with long-term fatigue disorders using the Myers-Briggs protocol and saw some value in that. So I've got some anecdotal experience of it working, but I think the risk to reward ratio is way off for that. So no business I'm currently involved in uses IVs.
Interesting.
I don't believe.
Very controversial on that one.
Yeah, and I'm fine to be. I'm not there to say, if you said to me, where would it sit in the ecosystem? It's not on the top 10 by a mile.
We're almost at time. And I almost don't want to ask this question because we're almost at time. But around peptides, if you are not a fan of IVs, you're probably not all that supportive of peptides either.
Good question. I'm a massive believer in, and peptides is a molecular structure. So I got asked as a conference recently, people said, what's your thoughts on peptides? It's like, well, insulin. I'm a big fan of insulin because if you don't have insulin and you have type 1 diabetes, you will die. I'm a huge fan of GLP-1s, tirzepatide. I love retatrutide. I think will change the world. And I've worked in the UK to enable a couple of groups I'm with to roll out GLP-1 specific partnerships because I believe they're the greatest ally the fitness sector's had in a generation. And if you view it as a competitor, you'll lose. And if you don't understand its mechanism, you'll also lose. So I think those drugs will become longevity drugs. Am I a fan of BPC 157? Not unless you're a rat and you're pretty confident that you have a tail. Am I a fan of TB 500? Not unless you're a rat. I think
wow.
that, what I'm aware of is
You're crushing us, Ollie.
Listen, I love them. I think they'll be great. On a population basis, let's imagine you were a high-level high roxer. I'm probably talking to you here, Mo, and you're saying, I'm get recurrent soft tissue injuries. I'm pretty self-aware. I'm observing my metrics through regular blood work, and I think I've tried every recovery modality, and I'm still sore. That's limiting my performance. Then, I might do the Wolverine stack, and I'd observe my metrics over time, and you'd probably be a great case. The danger then is going on and saying, I'm on peptides, you should be too. They are basically going to change the entire world, but we just need to do a bit more human trials on the repercussions. Let's take BPC 157. It drives angiogenesis, so it'll increase my blood supply. That is the exact thing I don't want when I've got the presence of a tumor, because I don't want blood supply. The same thing, why doesn't everyone just whack in growth hormone? Because it will grow everything. Why don't I just whack in BPC 157? Because we haven't seen enough of a diverse population where that might enable a negative process rather than just a beneficial process. So peptides must be taken in the same way as I would work with a fitness chain. What is the question you're asking? Can I recover slightly better? Well, is your sleep 9 out of 10? Is your hyperbaric oxygen therapy? Is your infrared sauna, your hydration, your carbohydrate intake? There'll be 9 things I could cover before I would conceive of a peptide. So why don't I double down on foundations before I jump to a shortcut that's got potential long-term repercussions?
Well, look, Mo, I think we are at time. Probably relevant to do a couple of quick takeaways. I'll start with you, Mo. Like, what is your takeaway from this week's episode? There's a lot we've covered, and I think we need longer next time.
And I do think I'd love to unpack the IV side a little bit more because it's such a massive industry, Ollie. And I think, we, both Matthew and I have taken several forms of IVs.
Same here.
We've talked about peptides, but have never dabbled in peptides. Actually, that's a lie. I am using a peptide face cream, which I got for free at a conference. And I will tell you, it has actually removed some things from my face. But I really was happy to hear about that sauna would be number one. I've been thinking about on the fence about investing in a sauna at home because I've got a lot of things at home and I spend a lot of time. I work out at home. I always love a sauna when I'm able to make it into a gym. So I think you've just now pushed me over the fence on saying, go get the sauna. So thank you for that. I am going to message you because I'm curious about the infrared and which one I should get. So you will get a private message from me. But I love the fact that, if I were to take a takeaway, it's the focus on the fundamentals. It's the building of awareness within your staff. And then also when you're looking at wellness, hit the top 3 that Ollie talked about. Matthew, any key takeaways for you?
Yeah, I think the same, similar to what you said about the fundamentals. We have started to hear this quite a bit more recently, and I think before you even want to expand into any of these other treatments, just make sure you've got your exercise, your sleep, and your nutrition dialed in. Which most people, even us that are in the industry, have to probably admit that we're probably around about a 7 or 8 out of 10 in terms of optimizing those parts. But I also like the fact that you mentioned if you are if you've got a fitness club, studio, whatever, then also have a 9 or 10 out of 10 on your fitness product, which I think many operators have to accept that they're probably not there either, and so getting that dialed in before you then invest in the other areas might make a lot of sense. And I'm sure some of this will start to become apparent as more and more people get involved. But Ollie, any final thoughts that you want to leave us with after this week's episode?
Just that I love you two. I think you do a fantastic job. I'm always, every time at a conference, I'm trying to get off either a stage or a conversation, get over to you two to hear what's going on at the bleeding edge of all things. So I think, again, hugely grateful for you two for putting this work out there, for the insights you share. I learn an awful lot when either of you do a big post. Mo, your insights into the technology space in this sector give me again a really lovely perspective on things at very much the cutting edge. So I think it's great conversations to have, and helping people to realize there's no one thing, there's your thing, but start with a better question before you buy a product. And I'm service first, product second, and I think that's been a good theme that's arisen from this. I don't think, and you say if you can't do fitness well, don't do wellness at all, because you'll just do two things at a substandard level. So master the basics, and then there's lots of space to play, and there's lots of commercial opportunities, but don't neglect the basics. It's a classic error, and it's a fool's error.
Love it.
Ollie, that advice could work on really anything, even with engineering. Focus on first principles, focus on the fundamentals, and ask the why, right? The why you're doing it. Well, thank you so much, Ollie, for joining us. This has been a fascinating episode. And if you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe, give us a like, comment on YouTube, join a conversation on LinkedIn. And yes, we are on YouTube as well. So if you're just listening to us, join us on the YouTube channel. And one other thing, if you have not subscribed to our monthly brief, we launched a Lyft's monthly brief at the beginning of this year. We've received some great feedback. It includes not only insights from episodes, but also insights that Matthew and I see in the industry as we're constantly texting back and forth over what we should be discussing on the podcast. You can subscribe to that brief at liftspodcast.com.